Prove to the court that I am sentient.
This is absurd. We all know you're sentient.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the series where I build a graphical text editor from the ground up, starting from just the terminal. Well, it's finally time. It is finally time to start working on the actual graphical text editor. I've been teasing this for a while, basically the beginning of every episode at this point, and I'm very excited to announce that now we're going to do it. So first things first, this episode is going to be focusing on just getting the project set up. So to start with, I'm going to go ahead and open up the README real quick. And this is really, it's less of a README, more of just like a to-do list of things that I need to implement at this point. At some point in the future, I will be changing this probably, fixing it, making it a bit more of a README versus just a really kind of poorly formatted to-do list, but we'll deal with that in the future. And so for now, I'm just going to talk about a couple of these. So I'll go through these in more detail whenever I'm actually focusing on them in an episode. But so for example here, the text editing portion of the editor, I want to be able to support things like multi-cursor editing and undo and redo. And that's going to be like a per buffer thing for obvious reasons. So all that kind of stuff are things that I want to try to implement. There's a whole bunch of more stuff here, but the essential basics are that I am going to be writing this in C++. I'm going to be using OpenGL as the graphics library, the API to interact with the GPU, and I'm going to be using, in this case, X11, XCB is the specific implementation of this, to handle windowing and user input. However, my goal is to make it so that the kind of setup that I have for that is easily changeable to something else. So like if I want to add support for Wayland in the future, then once I learn how to do that, I can do that. Or if I want to, if for whatever reason, a rock falls and hits my head and I decide to use Windows again, I wanted to be able to make it to support Windows. So that's some of the basics there. Like I said, I'll go through these in the future when I'm actually focusing on them for an episode. So let's go ahead and open up the makefile, because that is where a lot of changes have occurred. Now, the previous makefile was pretty simple, and it really only had to do like very, very basic things, but this time I want to go all out. And one of the major things that I want to be able to do is handle things like testing. I want to be able to handle compiling to a release build, and I want to be able to handle things like debugging and profiling. And so those are the main things that I focused on for this. So I've got various binaries here for all of those different purposes. So we've got just kind of like the regular build that I'll be working on, like just the regular editor. This is a debug build, which excludes this fsanitize flag because that is incompatible with GDB, which is the debugging software that comes with the compiler. I also have, this is the release build here. I'm not really going to be doing this very often, but one of the major things that it has is it sets this ndebug flag, which is a very common flag to see in release builds, and then also this werror flag here, which tells it to treat warnings as errors, because I don't want to leave any warnings in the finished software. And then I've also got a test binary here, and then a bunch of commands that help to use all of those, which I'll show you guys what that looks like once I get done with all the rest of this. I also went ahead and added in this, which will compile all of the various files into object files, and then the last step that you see here is what links them together. So like this one, this links all those together, same here. And the reason I did that is because when you're compiling, if you're compiling just, 2-3 files, it's pretty fast. Once you start compiling like 6 or 7 or more, it starts getting a little bit time consuming. And so it's better if you can pre-compile some of those, and then if they aren't changed, then there's no reason to recompile them. So you just have those object files waiting around, and then you link them in, and you're good to go. So that's why I did that. And that's most of what's really going on here. This isn't really like an in-depth explanation of Make, so if you guys want me to explain it a bit more, I might make a dedicated episode to it, but It's not really a subject that I'm particularly adept with. I'm just decent with it, but not great. So anyway, leaving that aside, let's go ahead and open up main.cpp. Now this is going to look very similar to what I had before, although I am going to be incorporating a lot of option parsing in this portion because we've got a bunch of potential arguments that I might want to add to the editor when I'm executing it on the command line. But this stuff here, it's pretty similar to what I had before, and it's very basic. And I'm not going to be worrying about any command line options for quite a while, because they're not necessary. Take a look at the test.cpp real quick. Oops. There we go. So one of the problems that I had in the previous editor, and it's still haunting me to this day because I'm still using this editor, is that the components that I used were not tested thoroughly. Now this is a failure on my part, and I probably should fix it, but right now I'm going to go ahead and just talk about this editor and how I'm going to handle that. So this test.cpp is essentially a separate main file that is going to contain tests for all sorts of different components. So tests for the logger, tests for the text buffer, tests for, I don't know, highlighting integration, whatever. All that kind of stuff is going to be tested. And so my plan is to have a bunch of tests here that will help to kind of stress the system and see where there are problems. And it'll also prevent me from having to do testing manually, because obviously doing tests manually is kind of a pain. So we don't want to do that. Go ahead and look up defines.hpp. And this has changed very, very little. The only thing I did is I added this platform error and render error. Platform error will be for the windowing API, basically. So in this case, X11. And then render error is going to refer to the renderer itself. So in this case, OpenGL is the API I'm using for that, and I'll be writing my own renderer. So if there's a problem with the renderer, maybe it's not up to the right version, or there's not able to create a proper OpenGL context, something like that, then it will return a render error. So, okay, let's go ahead and go into the app header. And this is, again, very basic. There's not everything that's going to be in here is in here right now for obvious reasons. I haven't built everything yet. But right now, all I have is the name and the running Boolean. That's basically it. And app.cpp, I have the logger set up already, and I've got that initializing and then deinitializing when I close the application. And then some debugging that's included in all this. And I'm not going to put the run loop into the run function here just yet, mainly because I don't have a way to get user input, and I don't really want to mess around with getting input from the terminal for this, since this isn't going to be a terminal editor. So that's why that's the way it is. Let's go ahead and look at the logger. So the logger has changed a bit here. So first off, the log param function, which is a template function, I moved all the template specializations into the source folder file for the logger, and that was just because GCC was complaining about it when it was in the header. So I just did that to get GCC to shut up. I also went ahead and added in functions, variadic template functions for info and warn and error and fatal. And that was to make it so that I could put in multiple arguments for all of those, as well as for debug. I don't typically plan on using arguments with those, but it might be necessary. So I figured I might as well just include it. If I don't end up needing it, then I can always remove it later. And then I also added some defines here so that I can kind of remove this little logger bit here when I'm writing it. And then, like I said, with the log param function, I have a bunch of these specializations here. The initialization has been remained largely the same. The only difference is that if, for whatever reason, the program has trouble opening a log file, then it will just default to the standard output. And I've also set it up so that for the moment it is just pointing by default at standard output, because that's perfectly fine with me. So I think most of the primitive types are being handled. So that's that. And that is everything. So now I'll show off these commands. So if I hit make run, then we get exactly what you would expect. Just compiles and runs the program. And we've got some debugging and info here. If I hit make debug, it's going to recompile it and open up GDB. And so I can run this and it will do its thing. And voila. So in this case, it runs normally. One thing that you will want to do, if you plan on using GDB yourself, make sure that when you're compiling, you do not compile with fsanitize on, because if you do, then it's going to complain because it doesn't run with fsanitize. So let's go ahead and quit that. And then I'll go ahead and test make release. And so this does the release build. If there was a warning for whatever reason, then it should not build the program. So if I had like an unused variable or something like that, it's not going to compile, and I'll need to fix that. And then finally, do make test, which it's only testing the logger at this point, but as you can see, it displays all of the various log functions, and everything seems to be working great. So that is everything that I did for this episode. And in the next episode, I'm going to get straight into writing the text buffer. Thank you very much for watching, and I hope you found this interesting and or useful, and I'll see you in the next episode.